I'd like to see HR in the future being more accountable for the outcomes that the business is achieving.
All right, welcome back to the Be Continued podcast. This is episode 9, and Ralph and I are here today with Chief People Officer Katy Kasper. Katy has a really great background in financial services, which we haven't had so far yet on the series, so that's going to be great. And I think we're eager to jump straight in. So Katy, thanks for joining us today and sharing your insights in advance. For our listeners, can you just take us briefly, give us some context in terms of your career journey and what you're working on today?
Absolutely. Well, first I'll say thank you so much to both of you for spending the time with me today. I'm looking forward to the discussion that we'll have. To share a little bit of background on me, I've worked in financial services for the last 14 years. Most of that time has been spent progressing through various HR roles, both in the US and the UK. So I spent time working for a large American bank and mostly did HR business partnering roles, which is really where a lot of my passion for HR is, in the business partnering space. I think it's such a unique opportunity to really build a strong relationship with a business partner, to understand where they're trying to take their team and their organization, and be somebody who can help lead and guide the way to their business outcomes and their ultimate success. So I spent many years working as an HR business partner, and then had the opportunity to come over to the UK to lead the HR team for the UK subsidiary of that US bank, which was a fantastic opportunity to really broaden my HR experience, lead a full end-to-end HR team responsible for the business strategy and the HR strategy, here in the UK, and organizing my team to make sure that, that we were helping lead where the business was going. So I spent several years doing that. At the time, we were returning to the office from COVID and completely redesigning what our working models looked like, adjusting to hybrid working like lots of other organizations did, and really thinking about, well, what does this new way of working mean for our culture, who we are as an organization, and how do we make the most of what's really unique about the company I was working for through this transition. We also did a lot of executive leadership change to kind of pave the path for the leaders of the future in that business. And I spent a lot of time, and this is something you and I have talked about, Jess, spent a lot of time really redesigning and upskilling and raising the performance bar within the HR team that I led as well, which is another area that I'm really passionate about. And then I had a chance, a bit unexpected, but I had a chance to step out of the HR function and lead the customer operations division of that business, which, in hindsight, I'm so glad I took that chance. It was a very challenging transition to make, but one that I think will make me a much stronger HR partner going forward. I had a chance to really take the skills that I developed leading HR functions and serving as the HR partner, and apply those in a very different context, in a very different way, leading a large scale team. I had about 1,400 people underneath me, and at a time that team really needed a lot of culture and talent transformation. There were strong subject matter experts, but they needed somebody to help bring some purpose and identity and help them raise the bar on the contribution that they could make to the business. So I felt like I could really add a lot of value with that problem statement, and along the way, learn a lot of new skills myself. And, that experience has helped me develop in tremendous ways. But I think, above all, it's helped me develop as a really commercially focused HR leader, and really understanding the business, I think, strengthens my ability to then come up with people solutions and be a strong partner. And through the thread of all of those kinds of experiences, the roles that I've had, especially in senior roles, have really been about building and creating high-performing teams and high performing HR functions in particular. And so a lot of my passion and the thing that gets me up in the morning is the kind of challenge that comes with needing to raise the bar and needing to help the HR team in particular to figure out their purpose, their identity, and how they can contribute more and more to the business that they're part of.
So, quite a lot of questions about all of that. But in particular, so this switch into the operational role. So head of customer experience?
Customer operations,
Customer
yes.
operations. So big centre, 1,400 people, big job, right? Big operational kind of role. Now, a lot of HR people, certainly you might say, have sort of wondered about, should I go and do something other than HR? At least for a little while, which feels like a reasonable idea. But so just talk us through, when someone came to sort of talk to you about this opportunity, just give us a bit of a sense of, what was going through your mind.
Yeah.
What's the pros of that? What's the cons of that? But what's the real thing going on in your head rather than just, obviously it was a good idea and I did it and it was great and blah.
Yeah. So at the time, I think there were two things going on. At the time, I had a real itch to contribute to the business in a very different way. I had, as I said, I had worked hard to evolve the executive leadership team that I was part of. And in doing so, we worked hard to establish, what are the expectations of senior leaders in this business? How do you operate? How do you work together? How do you put the goals of the business ahead of your individual department? And through that change and that transition, I did many of those things with my HR functional hat on. And I also watched my peers, some succeed and some struggle with that transition. And it gave me this real itch I want to contribute in a bigger way and a bolder way. And I don't mean in any way to minimize the value that HR can bring in many organizations, especially in ones like financial services or professional services. The value that HR can have on the business is exponential. But I personally wanted a different challenge and I wanted to have a different seat at that table. So there was an itch inside me, what does that look like? Because I was in the HR role, I obviously was privy to the fact that we were making some changes and there was an opening. And operations felt like the place where my skills were most transferable. So in a bunch of ways, there was some safety in that, right? This role requires great people leadership, great vision setting, the ability to connect with individuals at all levels in the organization. I had customer facing teams, so they were some of the most junior in the business. And so I thought, if I'm going to make this transition, there are tons of things on that Venn diagram that overlap with what I do every day. It's just in a different context. However, there were lots of unknowns and uncertainties too. I was going to be asked to really deeply understand how this business works. Well, I've spent 14 years in this business, but I've never been asked about how do we produce our lending product, or how do we interact with some of our most significant supplier relationships to get the most out of that. So I had anxiety about a lot of the different skills and the different challenges, but I was up for that challenge and I wanted to have those experiences. And I felt comfort in the fact that the peers I had around me were there to support me, because we had all just been on a bit of a journey together around what does it really look like to operate as an executive team. So there were some reasons where sort of that risk felt less because I had the group to support me, but there was a lot of internal anxiety around, I'm leaving something that I've been pretty successful at for a number of years to do something that I know is similar, but also is very different. And the reality of my experience for me is it was more different than I expected it to be.
So was it so definitely more different, but was it on balance easier or harder than you would imagine it to have been? Because a lot of people would sort of go, well, what does an HR person know about managing a great big sort of customer operations team? Now, I mean, I wouldn't say that, because I can imagine lots of things where there's a transfer. But, the normal business convention would be, and it wouldn't just be HR, would it? It could be someone from marketing, it could be someone from legal, they'd be like, well, they're from a sort of a professional function. They're going to be managing something really pretty different, much more operational, much bigger.
Yeah.
Different kind of people, different challenges. Yeah, but a lot of people go, oh, that's a massive kind of leap. And then, so I suppose the natural way is go, well, that must be much harder than anyone would imagine. And yet I've spoken to a few people and they'd sort of go, well, I'm not saying it wasn't hard, and I'm not saying it wasn't challenging, and I'm not saying it wasn't more different than I imagined. Yeah. But actually it was okay for an HR person to do this. And all of those ideas that I had that should be transferable, they were. Yeah. And but what was your experience?
Yeah, my experience was very similar to that. And I think as I look back on it, I took a couple of approaches that from my perspective tried to really leverage my strengths and be really candid and open about what I know and what I don't know.
Yeah.
So, my team would come and talk to me about a relationship with a supplier, for example. Well, my first question would be, what do they do?
Yeah.
What part of our business do they support? And then oftentimes I would say, okay, and why is that part of the business important? Why should I care about that? Or help me understand where that fits in to the overall context. So I didn't shy away from saying, I have no idea what you're talking about right now. Talk to me like you're talking to your grandmother is something I would say very often. And I needed to lean into that because it was the best way for me to really authentically lead in those moments and to leverage the skills and experiences and expertise of the person I'm speaking to. Yeah. So being really open with my team about what I know and what I don't know, and then not diminishing the strengths that I was bringing from my HR experience. So in my experience, I think operations leaders, and this is why sometimes it can be a good place for HR people to transition, their jobs in many ways are to lead people. And so there are a lot of transferable skills in terms of leadership and vision setting and managing the work of large teams. But even then, I found myself in the room with my team where something would feel so obvious to me that wasn't being said around the table, whether it was investment in people leader development and needing to bring more structure to that, whether it was, what I was hearing them say about their teams and the quality of talent we had. And so I just really needed to lean into my strengths and say, I'm here for a reason. And certainly one of the reasons can be to help them understand this is how you could upgrade the talent that you have. And so I can't shy away from sharing an opinion and a perspective on what I'm hearing, even if I'm a lone voice in the room. It can be hard sometimes to be new to a function, building new relationships with people, questioning yourself all the time of like, am I supposed to be here? Am I doing a good job? How do I show up as an operations person rather than an HR person? But for me, it was all about really stepping into those moments and saying, I have built skills over time that are useful now, and let me challenge the way things are being done to try and make a difference.
Yeah.
And I'd be curious to know then transitioning back into a HR role after that, because we've talked a lot about commercial HR and that being understanding how business makes money, but not everybody has the opportunity to step into, a true business role. Did you find going back into a HR role, did you take anything with you? Did your mindset change from having that experience, and what did that look like?
Yeah. Yes and yes, for sure. It's changed a lot. I think there are a few things that really stand out to me now as I transition back. The first is I understand the reality of the pressures and the challenges that we call them business partners often, but that our business partners face. Even myself, as somebody who'd spent over a decade in HR, when I was in that operations role, lots of times HR and people problems were the last thing that I had time or energy to focus on, because I had so many what could feel at the time as sort of more urgent or bigger business challenges to address. And so having sat in that seat thinking, okay, well now if I realize that it's not lack of interest or intent around people strategy, it's just the number and the volume and the challenging things that somebody has going on, it would change the way I interact with a leader to say, help me understand first and foremost what's going on for you. Like, I really want to understand that in order to be the strongest HR partner I can be. Or, let's step into a conversation that does some really quick brainstorming, and then let me take this away because I know the pressures that you're facing today. So I think that was a huge one. The other thing that it has changed for me is I had a really great operations leader who was kind of in my sphere of mentoring at the time, who used to talk a lot about challenging his teams to tell me how you know what you know. So how do you actually know that we've delivered what we say we have for our customers? How do you know that? What's the data? Where is that coming from? How much, do we trust those sources? And I think that way of thinking can help me be a stronger HR partner, because oftentimes HR people, we tend to feel it in the gut more so than actually looking for the evidence of, how do I know that my business is going in the direction I want it to? What am I measuring? What am I seeing? Who am I talking to? And then using that language to influence the top table, or to influence the other leaders around the table about where we need to go. I think having worked in an environment, especially like operations, where you have to have the data to prove that the thing is happening, the thing that you say should happen is happening, that's a mindset shift that I think HR can really benefit from, sort of a professionalization of some of the things that we do. And having lived, in that world, I think I can come back now into HR and say, well, you told me something. How do you actually know that's what's going on? And how does that fit within the people system, or the organizational system that we've created? So it's a different way of thinking about the work that people are doing, and how we measure and communicate and tell stories around what HR is doing.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, that apart from the points about using data and actually having to evidence what you're saying or proposing, and something more than a gut feeling or conventional wisdom, the point you're making about, you realise how busy a line manager or a line leader or business partner or whatever you want to call them is. Because I remember when at Sky, chief exec there always made this very good point about again, it wasn't just to HR, but all of the support functions, be finance, legal, HR, marketing, be like, as you invent lots of new initiatives to justify your existence, just sort of bear in mind that the person that you're asking to implement all of these, so let's take a customer operations sort of director, each of your functions invented 7. They're facing into 7 of you lot. So that's now 49 things or 50 things that they've got to do before they even do their day job. So actually, what might be better is to go really hard on a very small number of things, because then there's some chance of these line leaders actually having the capacity to do one of them rather than the 7. And I just remember him, because he was always saying, maybe you guys sort of think that you're going to justify your existence by showing me all the loads of things you're doing. But actually what I would much prefer as the leader of this business is you just told me 2 brilliant things that we should be doing all year. Evidence-based and inspiring. And that will do. And I won't criticise you for not coming up with, I'll applaud you and all your other functions for just, keeping it focused.
I like that approach. I often feel a level of frustration when HR talks about itself as a support function, because I think it creates the slippery slope of what you just said, that, if I'm here to support, then I'm more removed from the outcome or the accountability for the outcome. So I really like to talk to my team about, we enable isn't even the strongest of words I think we could come up with, but we deliver business outcomes, and they have to be aligned with where the business is going and what they need. And I think really high-performing, well-run HR teams create that alignment and see themselves less as support functions and more as accountable for delivering something that is fully aligned with where the business wants to go. And the answer is, it is always less rather than more.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. And I want to push us on because you mentioned in your intro about building high-performing HR teams, and it's come up several times already in the discussion. And actually building teams, though it's come up sort of briefly, I guess, across each episode, we haven't really talked about it deeply as a topic. And you're someone that's great to speak to on this because you've mentioned you have built teams or inherited teams. You've been open about the fact that those teams might have been fairly disengaged or unclear, and how you've turned that around and turned that into a very purpose-driven, high expecting HR team. Can you give us a bit of context on that and also speak to what's been important to you in terms of having success in building those teams?
Yeah. So I've stepped into a couple of different roles where there was an expectation of a turnaround, whether that be the more one-to-one relationship between the HR business partner and the senior leader. I've also been in roles where the focus is on developing and upskilling a HR team in itself, and then obviously as the head of HR had a full spectrum, full end-to-end HR function. And there's a couple of things that I think of when I think about sort of building high expectations or high performing HR teams. And first and foremost, for me, it starts with real purpose and identity. What are we here to do as a function, of course, but what am I here to do as an individual? Because behavior change, regardless of whether we're talking about the HR team or somewhere else in the business, behavior change isn't driven by big transformational programs. In my opinion, is driven by individual level change. And so starting with understanding what is my purpose in this business. And as a leader, I see it as my job to challenge people to think in a big and bold way about that. So somebody might say, well, my purpose is to recruit software engineers. And I might say, well, what is a bigger, bolder version of that? Your purpose is to find the best, most highly skilled software engineers that fit in the culture of this organization and will further the mission and purpose, and to use all the tools available to you to do that. So for me, it starts with helping people identify what's my role and what's my purpose. And then the way that I lead is with real transparency and accountability that change starts with the leader. And it starts with who the leader has around them and the behaviors that the leader tolerates, of those people around them. So using myself as a role model for what I expect from my team, and not shying away from, making hard decisions about who's there, who's not there, what are those expectations. I think it's really important, though, not to make people guess. We've all been in circumstances where somebody's talking about things are changing, or, I want to see this team contribute more than it has before. And you look around and you think, well, that sounds great, but what does that actually look like? What do you mean? What am I thought I was doing that yesterday, and then today you're having this conversation with me. So role modeling the behavior myself, and then setting expectations, and being open about that. And, I think that can be everything from giving people feedback of, hey, this is what I see you doing, and this is what I think you could do more of in the future, to being engaged in the way that the work is structured and the work is delivered so that teams are on the right path. And then finally, I think there's an element of the systems and the structure that the leader creates when you're trying to increase performance and expectations. Because it's easy for us to say, oh, you need to find your purpose and go off and do that. But actually, you could be in a bigger mess if you've got 50 people on your team who have found their purpose and then they want to go off and do lots of different things, right? That goes down to your point about, HR is doing too much, that's not kind of aligned with what's necessary. So the leader creating some structure around what are we here to do as a team. And there's lots of different ways you can do that, from, the way that your team works, whether it's agile, the data that you gather, the ceremonies and the routines that you have as a team. But, I think combining the purpose, the role modeling, and then the ways of working are the best ways that I've found to be able to help a team really understand and then see and measure their own success as well.
Yeah, I mean, purpose is a funny thing, though, isn't it? Because I think the conventional idea of, how purpose, should play out in an organisation is that everyone's absolutely priority of purpose should be the organisation's mission. But that isn't what most people I agree completely that purpose is phenomenally important in life, right? I mean, it has all sorts of benefits if you could crystallise, what it might be. But I remember, we used to have this sort of conversation in various places I've been, but a good one would be Sky, where it had working with the customer operations sort of groups. There might be sometimes this frustration that, someone working in a contact centre in sort of, Dunfermline in Scotland, wouldn't put Sky first and foremost, and that was somehow a negative thing about the person. But if you actually went and spoke to the person, you'd get a completely different understanding. They'd go, no, like Sky isn't my sole reason for being. And so my big purpose is they might have sort of young kids or whatever and And they'd go, it doesn't mean that Sky's not really important. My work it's like my purpose is my kids and having enough time with my kids and so on. And I work in this contact centre because it has brilliant shift flexibility, and they'd reel off all the very positive things about Sky in relation to a purpose in their life that had nothing to do with Sky. But that didn't make them any less good as someone who worked there. That was phenomenally important to them. They're like, I don't want to leave here. I'm going to sort of work really hard to keep my job and do the best job I can because I appreciate all the things it gives me that help me serve that purpose over there.
Yeah.
And I think, the HR teams, it wouldn't be a bad thing for them to expand their understanding of purpose a little bit. It does really, really matter, but it might not be exactly what a cliched view of purpose might expect it to be.
Yeah.
Which is something wholly aligned with this organisation as that individual's top priority.
Well, I share the same view. When I talk about purpose, my intention is to talk about the role you play in the organization and being really clear about that. Everyone will have other identities and other reasons for doing the thing that they do. I think the reason, in my experience, that purpose has been so important is because it gives you the so what. And if you as teams are having conversations about that so what, then it's a step farther to say, does that feel aligned with where we're going as a team and as a business? Or is that an area that we need to explore because actually it's going to take you down the path of wanting to focus your time and effort on something that's not aligned to the direction. Yeah. And I've also seen, and Jess and I have talked about this in the past too, I've also seen some of those conversations lead to discussions where somebody might want to opt out of what that change and what that future looks like. And I credit a senior HR leader who I worked with years and years ago for really normalizing that. And I think when you're going through transformation within an HR team, for me, it's really important to normalize that opt-out because everyone has a choice when they get up in the morning about where they go and where they spend their time. And when you're trying to drive change, especially in a function that can be quite change resistant because we're used to doing it to others rather than doing it to ourselves, the choice to be there in my experience, is one of the strongest indicators then of the commitment and the success that somebody will have. And so when I've led teams through change, it's been really important to me on the backs of some of the experiences I've had and the mentors that I've had to normalize that opt-out conversation, because it doesn't mean there's failure. And I think in high performance cultures or, high functioning teams, sometimes it can feel like failure because, hey, I'm expected to be here contributing to the direction the team is going on. But actually opting out just means it's not right now. It may have been right in the past for somebody, but right now they want something different. And that goes hand in hand for me with then the people who stay are bought into the vision and the commitment.
Yeah.
And it's easier for me as a leader to say to them, hey, yes, we're on a journey where tomorrow's going to look different than yesterday did, but you've made a choice to be here, and I'm going to do everything that I can to give you the context, the access, the resources, the strategic direction to do something that feels bigger and bolder. But it's really important that you opt in to that.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you specifically about that, because you mentioned it to me when we had a discussion, this kind of opt-out principle. And actually, no other chief people officer had ever mentioned something like that to me. So, and it resonates, right, with, I think, with a lot of people, that feeling of not wanting to feel stuck, or like you have options, and that can actually spur more commitment to your cause or your purpose. But can you give us an example of what that conversation would look like? Because I think, for me, how does that go? So how do you normalize it? Can you give us an indication?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I've done to normalize it is just say in conversation with teams, everyone's time to leave the organization will come. I'm not saying it's tomorrow, but everyone's time will come, and including mine and, including yours. And I think, especially in the environments I've worked in, which in my experience, the cultures are very performance driven. The reward system is very performance driven. It takes away, I think, some of the stigma of the moment when you have that thought process of, oh, actually, am I still being fulfilled in the way I want to from this role? To go back to your example, am I still contributing in the way that I want to? And so to talk about it a little bit and just say, I want everyone to be here who wants to be here. And if it's not the thing that you want right now, or if the vision that I'm describing and the expectations that I'm setting are not the things that excite you for the next part of your career, then come talk to me about that. And I've had it play out in lots of different ways. I think more often than not, there's context around, somebody hearing those conversations, and then you're stepping into what probably is a version of a performance discussion. But because you've opened that door, it can be a little bit easier for somebody to say, yeah, actually, I've enjoyed the time I've had here and I've benefited from it, but I want to do something different next. And then I've been surprised. Some people have just come to me and said, hey, I'm looking for something different and I don't want to leave the team unsupported. So let's figure out what that looks like. But it's a way of people owning their own career, right? Giving them stewardship of what they want to do, and knowing, at least from my perspective, that they'll be treated with respect and care through whatever that process looks like.
So you have worked in the States and here. Do you think that that's an easier thing to get your head around in the States than it is here, this idea of it's okay to opt out? I've never really thought about it before, but it's making me wonder, having worked in the States, and are sort of North Americans more comfortable? We're sort of going, it's like, that's a more adult to adult kind of relationship. You're in while it serves your purpose and ours.
Yeah.
And once it doesn't, why are we all sort of sticking together?
Yeah. I think there's some more comfort with it. Yeah. People, in my experience, the cultures have been very similar. I mean, I worked for an American subsidiary or UK subsidiary of a large American bank, but inherent in the differences in employment law and the differences in cultures, I think there is more acceptance of people are going to move and transition. And in my experience, it doesn't make the relationships any more transactional, or less impactable, but there is a bit more of acceptance that's what will happen.
It just, because it reminded me, going back, there was a guy that he was a serial entrepreneur. He's called Brad Zumwalt, and he was brilliant. He's a guy that I think he created and sold 4 companies, all doing similar things for a lot of money. But he was really interesting. When I was at Getty, we bought one of his companies called iWire. But he had this really kind of fascinating thing in their culture. It was a really good company, really good culture, and it was mainly based in Calgary in Canada. But they had a thing, so their performance review each year didn't really look like a thing where you set objectives and so on. In many respects, it was much more sophisticated whilst looking very simplistic. And the process was that you brought your CV in each year to your conversation to have your review. And if it had more good stuff on it that you felt really pleased to put on your CV by dint of your work at iWire in the previous year, the conversation was like, great, what next for next year? But their philosophy was, but if you came in and your CV looked exactly the same as it did last year, a conversation then ensued about, it wasn't really about purpose, it was more about mastery and learning and development. The conversation was like, it's still the same as it was. Have you learned anything that you think is really important over the past year that really serves you well as an individual? And if they sort of went, well, sometimes they'd go, yeah, I've forgotten to put it on my CV. But I think more often than not what happened is someone was like, it was well established culturally. People were like, not so much actually. And then it led to a bit of a conversation about opt-out. It was a bit sort of, okay, well, that's probably not good for you and it's not good for us as a business. And so if we're going to go at this adult to adult, what does that mean? You do think there are opportunities to learn more? And if the person was going, actually, no, I think I've kind of maxed out on my learning here, then it just led to this really sensible conversation about an off-ramp. And when you first looked at it, you sort of thought, God, that's very sort of unusual and simplistic in a way. But the more you thought about it, the more you're like, actually, that's really sophisticated and adult to adult and, really, really rather cool. And it definitely worked for them as a business because, I say, he had built a really successful business 4 times running similar philosophies through each.
Yeah.
So,
No, I like that example. I mean, it gets people to think bigger picture about what they're doing and why they're doing it, which I think is part of the point that I'm trying to make. What is the purpose of what I'm here to do? How do I fit into this organization that I'm part of? And is that continuing to challenge and motivate me? And when new leaders come in and try to do something different, it's a good time for a reset. And if those leaders are successful at painting a picture of what the future looks like, how will the team contribute? How will that individual contribute? I think then it gives them a good opportunity to make a choice to say, yes, I'm all in on that bus. That's a phrase that I've often used, or actually, do I want something different? And every leader wants people on their team who are committed, right? And who are going to contribute in the strongest way they can towards their goals. So from my perspective, if somebody's struggling with whether the thing that's going on right now is right for them, the culture should allow for a conversation to explore that. And if that means, they're saying, hey, I want to opt out and move on, then that's the right outcome for them.
Yeah. And the business.
Yes.
Because, what business benefits from having a load of people who are not exercising a choice to stay proactively? They're kind of there either because they've just got used to it or they feel that they have no other choices.
Yeah,
that's not a good situation.
And in my experience, it can be really hard to have those conversations in HR. It's very easy for us to support a business partner through that, or to have a conversation with somebody, in the business about what that looks like. But when we come and do it within HR, I think it can be really challenging because we're both blessed and cursed by knowing what all of that looks like and what that means. And so, again, one of the things I've tried to do with my teams is just create an environment where I'm really clear about this is where we're going. And I want people who are on board with that. And there will be a lot of care taken if that's not the right thing for you. That's fine.
Yeah.
This opt-out principle is very simple, but it's very profound as well, I think. I want to switch gears slightly to talk about sustainable change. And by that, I mean not just transformation programs, but change that actually sticks. And I know you've done a lot of this work. So what does that, can you give, in your experience, what does that mean for you? And what is it that you think really makes the difference in terms of change that sticks?
Yeah. So in my experience, change sticks when you have the right leaders who can role model what they expect going forward and who are willing to really hold the line on what their culture looks like. And I say that because, are lots of frameworks and transformation programs that you can put together and that HR can lead on. But actually, those kinds of things don't deliver behavior change and sustainable change. It's individual level people saying, I'm going to take a different approach, or I'm going to hold myself to a different standard. Individual level behavior change grows over time and leads, in my opinion, to sustainable change. And I think that has to start with senior leadership, and lots of times with HR as well, being willing to role model and show the way. And so, I've spent a lot of time in my career assessing with my team or with the business teams that I supported, who are the people who understand the future of where we're trying to go, and how can we help magnify their voice and their presence to tell that story and to have others see them as role models. And who are the people who, as we were talking about a minute ago, aren't going to be part of that future either through skill or will, and how do we create the right opportunities for them to transition or exit, or move on? Because every employee in your business, no matter how large or small, is looking up at the people above them for what are they displaying, what are they role modeling, and are their actions and are their words consistent? So for me, the sustainable change really starts with senior leader behavior, senior leaders, from a talent perspective, being willing to make tough calls to say, these people are displaying the behaviors that I want, and I'm going to put them in large, meaningful roles. I'm going to build my team around the potential that I see in them. And I'm willing to make tough calls to make changes for the folks who aren't part of that journey, either because they don't want to or because the organization, is going in a different direction than the skills that they have. And when I think about the transition I've done and the change I've delivered with HR teams, I'm not going to say it happened quite overnight when you have different senior leaders in the mix, but it almost happened overnight, because teams look around and they say, oh, I can see an immediate change in the way these senior leaders operate, the way they treat me, the way they manage my work. And that's one of the biggest changes, that I've seen. And then also I'd say creating the right structures to let people do the work that's most meaningful and most valuable. One of the things that we did with my HR team when I took over and was trying to really drive a change in ways of working, sort of similar to what you were talking about, that we needed to stop doing a lot of things in order to do a few things much, much better. I had my team of 50 write down every single thing they were working on. So a project that you're doing or a deliverable that somebody expects from you, write it down, tell me who your sponsor is, what other teams you're relying on, when you expect it to be complete, what are your conditions of satisfaction for finishing this? And it was really eye-opening, because for me and for the team, you look at that and you think there's a lot going on that shouldn't be, and we don't need to be, but the team didn't have the mechanisms to say no to work, or they didn't have the credibility with the business to say no to work. And so it just grew and grew and grew. And so when you can bring people together around a purpose, when you have the leaders who are the right ones for the future, and when you create through your ways of working, the right structures and the right cadences to make sure that the work that people are doing is the right stuff for what the business needs at that time, I think that supports a lot of the journey on that sustainable change. Ways of working is particularly important, in my opinion, because there's such diversity in what we do as HR teams. Everything from bespoke, sort of discrete project work to really ongoing process execution, helping teams manage that work in a way that brings transparency to how does this connect to the business objectives, and giving them the air cover to say no or to stop something, so that they can build those muscles over time has been really important.
Yeah, I've seen some good examples of giving people a mechanism to stop doing things. One of them was a guy who joined us at Sky, Paul Doyle, brilliant head of HR Insight. He's still there. But when he joined us from, I think, the police force, doing data and stuff in there, or maybe Bank of Scotland, but he'd been in the police force doing.
I remember meeting him one time. He blew my mind.
Yeah, he was really amazing. Well, he still is an amazing guy. But when he joined us, he was just like HR Insight can be just a capacity sort of suck. And one of the first things he did, like every big HR team, has loads of reports that it creates by rote. Every month, producers, let's call it 12 key HR Insight reports. He joined and he immediately password protected all of them and didn't give out the passwords. And he had done it before, and he said, look, the philosophy here is I don't think that I'm going to be asked for the password for 7 of the 12.
Right.
Because no one's reading it. When I'm asked for the password, then we'll give some thought as to how important that report is on. But if I'm not asked by the business for a password, we're just going to stop doing that. And the amount of capacity that one of those reports could take, for if we had a team of 10 people, it could take a lot of human capacity just to create one of those reports. They're often vast, it's sucking in enormous amounts of data. And he was absolutely right. That's what he did. And I think he discovered that only 3 of them at Sky that he got asked for the report. So he stopped 9. So he, effectively got 75% of that capacity back from the most sort of simplistic but logical thing. But I think HR teams find this really hard to do that sort of stuff, right?
So
They worry a lot about what will happen if we do that. Someone will blow a gasket. It's like, no, actually take some sort of comfort in your own irrelevance. They won't. Most people don't notice most things that most people do at work. So, our job is to actually find the things that people do notice and really, really focus our energy and our capacity on those things. The other stuff, doesn't matter if it might have been done for 10 years. Who cares?
Yeah.
We're not doing it anymore.
Yeah. I think HR finds it really hard to say no. And that's one of the opportunities that we have, especially now when you think about how much technology is available to the HR function, how much the pace of change has continued to accelerate. The function, in my opinion, needs to continue to develop that bravery and that courage, because it's one of the things we talked about too, was sort of how has HR changed and evolved over the years. And as I look back, I think there's been a lot of professionalization of HR. So you have really deep technical expertise in some areas. You have things like people insight or people analytics that didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago, with some talent who are at the same quality as people who do similar work in the business. And so we have knowledge and skills, but now we have an opportunity to really, as a function, kind of elevate the clarity of what are we going after. And saying no is a huge part of that. Yeah. And it's hard when you want to be liked. Lots of HR people want to be liked. Lots of HR people are often on the more junior side, of their relative peers as well. We talked about seeing yourself as a support function. Like, what's a mindset shift that's necessary to see yourself as on equal footing with the likes of, the commercial team or the sales team or the finance team. And in my opinion, I think that's an exciting challenge for HR looking ahead. Is can we as a function bring enough clarity to the things that we're trying to achieve to operate at pace and to build that commercial credibility and to take advantage of the technology and the resources that are available out there. But if we try and do 100 things instead of 5 or 10 things, I think we'll stay operating like we have in the past. I
think that's right, because every HR team is obviously all very well intentioned, and a lot of them extremely capable. But all of them, certainly when we do work with them, all of them report, and our biggest problem is we don't have time, right? We don't. But here's the thing, this idea of like radical prioritization, based on evidence of what makes a difference and what doesn't make a difference. Our sort of philosophy has always been, look, most HR teams could probably find 50% new capacity by stopping doing 50% of the things, which there's no evidence in the world anywhere ever made a difference anywhere. So it's not even hard to find the underlying kind of research and evidence which would logically say, don't waste your time doing that thing anymore. A lot of them worry about it. That guy, Paul, who did that, I remember having a conversation with our chief exec at Sky about something else he had done. He had, for the first time, produced a bit of predictive analytics. And I remember Jeremy getting sort of very animated in a positive way about, at last, HR's actually come out with some predictive data. This is incredible. And on the back of that, I said to him, he's interesting, new hire. And he did this thing where he put the password on whatever and he stopped it. Most, I think, people's instant reaction is that's too crude. Someone like a chief executive will go, that's irresponsible. Jeremy, who was a brilliant chief executive, his reaction was, thank God. Good. He was, it sounds like a really good hire. But I just think that is the reality. I think most chief execs would behave exactly the same as him. But I think most HR functions worry that that's not how the business is going to react to radical prioritization.
Or if I think about the experience I had stepping out of HR into operations, one of the things I benefited from was seeing how they chunked up work in order to make progress. And I think for HR ways of working, there's huge opportunity there for most teams. I mean, I'm sure there are teams out there who have developed this skill over time. But when you think about work in HR, it can be this very big, grandiose, we want to have the best people leaders we can. Well, we're not going to develop the best people leaders we can in the next 3 months or 6 months or even 12 months. So what's a way to chunk up that work where you can say, we've delivered this in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. But it's a different way of thinking for a lot of HR professionals and a different way of working. And I think in many businesses, making that shift means that you match more how work in the business is delivered, the cadence and the rhythm that the business is going through. And so you can then also create stronger evidence and stories around the things that you're doing. But to go to an executive team and say, we're going to create the best people leaders we can, that's when people's eyes start to glaze over and they're like, okay, well, what are you going to talk to me about that I haven't already heard or that we haven't already tried? But to focus on what can I deliver in a shorter period of time is a mindset shift and a way of working shift that I think HR can really benefit from and brings the function some good positive momentum to then look back on and say, this is the impact we've had. These are the contributions we've made. Let's figure out what the next time horizon looks like.
Yeah, I think this 80-20 model is incredibly on trend at the moment. Most briefs that we take it are talking about it. Kind of what are the 80s? What can you drive to 80%? Not perfect, not 100. And then what are the 20s that you can kind of let go of? We've got one massive multinational client that only hires people who are experts in this. So I feel like we're a bit specialist on it ourselves. It's crazy how quickly time flies. So I want to kind of move us towards the end of the podcast and to stay on. I think there's a lot of really amazing takeaways there. And you mentioned the kind of opportunity of what's next. And I think we should go along that beat and kind of end on talking about the future of HR. What are your thoughts on this in terms of, if you look to the future, what are some things that the HR function where could we be braver? What should they be taking hold of more where maybe they don't have ownership of at the moment? What would you like to see happening?
Yeah. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I think I'd like to see HR in the future being more accountable for the outcomes that the business is achieving. I guess I have a bit of a personal soapbox around moving away from this support function mindset to increasing the level of accountability that you deliver, because it encompasses a lot of what we talked about. Is it the right stuff? Do I have the right team? Am I challenging and supporting the business leaders around me in the right way? And in order to have that level of accountability, I think chief people officers and chief HR officers really need to run their teams as businesses, run it as a business unit. What am I here to do? Where is my investment going? Where is the the world going in terms of employee expectations, business environments, and that requires a real commercial mindset to what we do in HR that I think has developed over time, but will be a really important part of the future. I was talking with somebody earlier today about creating business cases for technology investment and AI investment. And on the surface, it's always going to cost less to have an HR operations person deliver something versus a team of software engineers build technology that delivers that same thing. So the challenge that people have is creating real clarity of what's the problem we're solving for and what's the solution, what value is the solution going to add. So I think this owning outcomes requires us in the future to be more commercially focused, and we can only do that if there's real clarity for the HR team about what they're trying to deliver, and if the CPO is running their own team as a business.
Yeah. And I think part of the challenge is also, sticking to that 80-20 piece, that you can let go of things that maybe aren't a priority, and that's sometimes a challenge in itself. Just to end on, is there anything that you think the HR function is keeping hold of that they could let go of?
This may be controversial, but in my opinion, I think the HR team has been a bit, diluted over time when it's seen as the holder of culture. Like, in my opinion, culture is created by everyone, owned by everyone, and HR plays a really significant role in that, in creating the culture that the business wants, but diluting its impact and its power when it has to be all things related to culture. So I would really challenge our function and challenge my peers to think about how are you contributing to that culture through your own actions and through your own influence. But we as an HR team have to let go of really feeling fully responsible and accountable for the culture in an organization. It's too much to take on for us.
Well, thank you for being so open about that. I think those are the best insights. And this has been great. Really good food for thought, hopefully, for our listeners. And I hope you've enjoyed it as well.
I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Brilliant. Thank you.